I have a little bit more time. I want to touch on, since we're in the book of Kings, I want to look at Hezekiah's seal. If anybody has a smartphone, could you Google Hezekiah's seal and just look at it on your phone? I want to talk about something really quick to close this particular portion with. Just stop me whenever, Chief. All right. I'll give everybody about a minute or two. Now, for those who may not know what Hezekiah's seal is, King Hezekiah's seal has a lot of imagery from what we would call the Kemetic legacy or the Egyptian culture. For instance, you'll see a dung beetle and you'll see an ankh, right? Now, many of us who have looked at this particular seal have, I guess, asked ourselves, why is it that Hezekiah got this ankh on the seal, right? So, as Chief Uzael knows, I've been studying the language of the hieroglyphs, or i.e. the Medunetta, to a point where a lot of the things that they were telling us about the language that we obviously couldn't see because we didn't read it were absolute lies. And now that we do have people among us, such as myself, and I'm sure there's others more that I may not be aware of, that don't have a platform for you to know them, that they know it, that now we can actually even the slate and figure this thing out. So the first thing that we should note about King Hezekiah is that he was a revolutionary. And by revolutionary, I mean from the gate he came in and say, all this right here gonna stop. Did he not? That, by definition, made him a revolutionary. He turned things completely upside down. He said and he knew that Jehovah is God, and guess what? You're gonna follow him. And I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. You're gonna follow him. Yes, that's Hezekiah's seal, absolutely. The second thing is that he was a reformer. So, and by reformer, I'm going to bring you back to scripture and show you that King Hezekiah made alliances. One of his main alliances was with who? Egypt. Right? So if I'm making an alliance with a people, with a nation, then that means that I'm sending out delegates and we are conversing behind closed doors and we are doing things together to show unity, brotherhood. Correct? This is how an alliance works. King Solomon tried to achieve it another way. He said, we're going to marry them. Anybody was wondering why King Solomon had 1,000 wives? It wasn't because King Solomon was a little extra happy. King Solomon made alliances with many ancient kingdoms. And many of the wives that he took was not out of lust like many of us looking into it with our modern minds would have saw it. Many kings married women from other nations because they knew that, what you gonna do, kill me and your grandkids? We see that play out today too, by the way. We see a lot of great families mesh together that otherwise probably wouldn't have been together. This is wisdom, by the way. But King Solomon did it in a way that was distasteful because the book tells you that he can't do what? Multiply wives. Because again, what are you trying to seek trust in that for? You worried about alliances, you better ally yourself with Torah. So Hezekiah was a revolutionary and a reformer. And when you look at King Hezekiah's seal, you'll notice that there is an ankh on it, and there is also a dung beetle or a scarab beetle. Many of us have no clue what that means and automatically say, wow, King Hezekiah was an idolater. Or else why this there? Right? Wrong. Wrong. First and foremost to note, the Egyptian language, when we look at the syntax, linguistically speaking, of the Egyptian language, it evolved from what is called monoliteral consonants. All of the consonants were first monoliteral. Monoliteral meaning A, that's one sound, right? Biliteral is like two sounds, right? And then tri. So the ankh is a triliteral glyph or a triliteral sign. It gives you A-N-K, ankh, right? Okay, so this is a triliteral. The origin of the ankh, or the root word of ankh, is actually the K, the Kai. In Hebrew, what's the word for life? The word Ankh means what in the Kemetic language? It means life, right? The etymological root of the word for life in the Kemetic legacy, in the Kemetic language, is not Ankh. It's actually the Chai, life, making it relatable to Hebrew. So now we're getting a step closer. The Egyptians lived by something that is known as Ma'at. Ma'at translates in the Egyptian tongue as divine law, divine decrees. The root of Ma'at with a T is Ma'ar. Ma'ar literally means to see, to ponder, or to think, or even to improvise, as we see it used in the Merkut Sabiat, the pyramid text in Kemet, which is the basis or the corpus of their spiritual system, their spiritual books. We go by the Bible or the Torah. They go by something that's called Merkut Sabiat, the pyramid text. That's their Bible. And when you look at their Bible, these are some of the images and the scenery that you will see. Now, Ma'at is usually identified as a female, a goddess. She's usually symboled with a feather, an ostrich feather, coming out of her headdress. And I'm going to pull it up here and let you see it. So, can everyone see this? Can you see that there is an ostrich feather coming out of her headdress? Why an ostrich feather? This is a symbol, or one of the symbols, of divine law in the Kemetic legacy in the Egyptian culture, an ostrich feather. We do know that the people of Kemet went by not 632 commandments, not 10 commandments, but 42 negative confessions. The ostrich is a very unique animal in the animal kingdom. Number one, it doesn't have great social skills when it comes to raising children when you observe them, by the way. So I'm trying to figure out why they use that imagery. Number two, the gestation period of an ostrich is 42 weeks. Hence, when forming their legal system, they began to call it or number it up to the number 42, which is also the number of cities in ancient Kemet. They had what is known as 42 nomes, which is equivalent to saying the 50 or 51 United States, right? Okay. The original shape and form of the Ankh is quite different from what many of you are used to seeing. The image in the bottom left column is the original shape and form of the Ankh. And for those who can't see it right now in the room, it's actually going to be featured online because we have it streaming right now, the PowerPoint. So when you get a chance, you can actually look back at it if you're interested in figuring this out. The original symbol is actually a coiled rope or a measuring rod. The word Ankh doesn't just mean life, it also means citizen, it also means people. It also means a sandal strap. For instance, when we look at the sandal strap on the Narmer palette belonging to the first dynastic king of Egypt, he's wearing a sandal that is literally featured looking exactly like an Ankh. So when you want to say sandal in the Egyptian tongue, you're also going to say Ankh. And this is the most ancient form of the Ankh, it literally looking like a coiled rope. This rope was also used for measuring, because as we know, the ancient Egyptians were known to be one of the most brilliant architects throughout the ancient world. Am I right or am I wrong? So if you're following me, you'll understand that the Ankh itself, although it means life, the original emblematic symbol literally has the shape and form of a measuring rod and a coil, and we'll see why in a second. So this is how we would write the word Ma'at in the Kemetic text. This first symbol to my top left is a pedestal. It's the way that they measured a cubit in the Kemetic culture. They would literally measure it according to the shape and size of this pedestal. This pedestal has the phonetic sound of Ma. The sickle also has the phonetic sound of Ma. The sickle is this sword-like instrument featured right under the pedestal, and it also has the sound. Why the double sound or it being enumerated twice? in the Kemetic tongue is called a phonetic complement, because the Kemetic people usually, when they wrote on the walls of Kemet, it wasn't just about telling a story, it was the art behind the story. And this art form also played out in the way that they spoke their language. So sometimes they would add similar sounding letters to their words just to overemphasize the word, especially when we see it written. That's why the most correct way to say ma'at is actually mayat in the Kemetic tongue. This arm gives you the sound of a. So far we have ma'ah, and this hill, the semicircle that we see, is the T. This is called a determinative. If you're having trouble or you're struggling reading the text, this determinative will let you know what this word is. This determinative is letting you know that we're talking about a lowercase God, because this is the goddess Ma'at. You know it's the goddess Ma'at because she's wearing the feather head of Ma'at. In a book entitled The Gods of the Egyptians by E.A. Wallace Budge on page 296, he has a chapter called Chakmah and Ma'at. Wallace Budge was fluent in Hebrew as well as the Egyptian language, which is called Medu Neter, or some say hieroglyphics. He found and made a very, very serious correlation between what we call Chakmah, wisdom, and what the Egyptians were calling Ma'at. He says, and I'll quote, "From the texts of all periods, we learn much about the conception which the Egyptians had arrived at concerning Ma'ah. And it is clear that the word primarily meant that which is straight, or to measure that which is straight. And it is clear that it came from concepts dealing with straightness, rectitude, uprightness, right, law, order, regularity, and justice, so that Ma'at, personified as truth, ultimately means measuring to see the straightness of a thing." What other instrument in the ancient world was used to figure out or come to the idea of the perpendicular shape of an object? A plumb line. It's going to get deep in a couple of seconds. A plumb line. Anyone know what a plumb line is? A plumb line was used in antiquity to measure the straightness of an object. So they would literally take a string and follow me what I was saying about the ankh. Its earliest representation is a coiled rope or a string. And that's their plumb line, by the way. A plumb line is when you take a long cord and you hang something that's heavy from it. Right. And what they would do is, as they were building huge artifices, they would align every single structure or every cubit or every block that is going according to the straightness of it. Because in order to get the hair or the rope perfectly straight, it had to be weighed down by something heavy. Right. All right? So that's how they came, because remember, they're not dealing with today's technology. They're dealing with yesterday's technology, so that's why they're doing it that way. Let me read on. Ma'ah was with, according to the ancient Kemetic texts, Kepura, when the world was created. There's a book called The Book of Knowing the Evolutions of Re. Some people say Ra, but the Egyptians actually said Re. In this ancient text, entitled The Book of Knowing the Evolutions of Re, the opening line says that I, Ma'ah, was with Re when he created the heavens and the earth. What does Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 through 30 say? Wisdom was with God when he did what? Ma'at in Kemet represents wisdom. Their divine law, just like the Torah tells us literally, when the Creator presented the Torah to us, he said what? This shall be your wisdom in the sight of the people, right? So that divine law represents a people's wisdom. So their divine law represented their wisdom in their eyes as well. And in their ancient text, they're saying that Ma'at or Ma'ah was with the Creator when all things were created. Now the dung beetle, or i.e. the scarab beetle that you're looking at on Hezekiah's seal, let me bring you back to that image really quick and try to blow it up. And I'll be really quick, by the way, because I know we're strapping for time. This is one of the forms of a netcher, which is how you say lowercase God in the Kemetic language. This is one of the forms of their lowercase God. And the name given is Keppera. But in a play on words, another way to write Keppera is to literally just put an ankh there. Because the ankh had two words, two meanings, and two sounds, depending upon the usage and the text that you were reading. When you look at the ankh, it's not always pronounced ankh. Sometimes it's literally pronounced Keppera. Keppera literally means forms or image, or to shape or to mold. The primal deity, lowercase god, representing this form is another nature known as Ptah, P-T-A-H. Anyone familiar with Egyptian culture may have heard of this particular deity. Ptah sounds very much like Hebrew, by the way. In the Egyptian tongue, or in the Egyptian text, they say that the universe was created through the spoken word of God. Does not our text say that? So what I'm going to piece together in a couple minutes and show you is that at one time, ancient Egyptians were absolutely monotheistic. And it began, did I say something crazy? Okay. And they began to devolve from those spheres of wisdom that was handed down to them by their foremost ancestor, Ham. Because Ham is who? He's the son of who? Noah. So didn't Ham know that there was one God? So that means he taught his children that there was one God, right? That means that the ancient Cushites and the ancient Kemetic or Egyptians also knew at one time that there was one God. But they got confused with the many different manifestations of his power. The Creator tells us in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So when you read El Shaddai, when you read El Rakum, and you're not an Israelite, you say, ooh, they got multiple gods. No, our Creator manifests himself in different ways depending upon the climate, the season, and the reason. Right. They look at all of these different manifestations as separate entities, and therein began the creation of polytheism. Right. Now, everybody really quick, open up, for those who know Hebrew, open up the book of Amos chapter 7 verse 7, and we're going to end the thought here. The Creator tells Amos that he's going to search out the righteous of the city with a plumb line. Keeping in mind with the theme, the plumb line in ancient Kemet is their ankh. And the plumb line is associated with measuring that which is straight, the straightness of a thing. Therefore, one of the epithets of the nation of Israel is what? What's one of the names that the Creator called us as a people, as a nation? Yashar, the upright one, right? Right? All right. And by calling us that name, Yeshurun, and the root being Yashar, to make straight. Yeshurun, the upright one. That was a poetic way to say that we are in our righteous estate. So that words or concepts having to do with measuring the straightness of a thing was always associated in the ancient world with righteousness. That's why you always see the goddess Ma'at holding an ankh. She's holding the plumb line, that which makes things straight. The Torah always tells us to follow the straight and narrow, because the straight and narrow path represents righteousness. So they're holding the ankh. Now follow me. Amos chapter 7 verse 7 says, in Hebrew,
Kohir ani wehine Adonai nitzav al chomat anaka.
Stop right there. Say that last word again.
Anaka.
Anaka. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's the same exact phonetics as ankh. Ankh is how you also say a plumb line in the Kemetic language. And the Hebrew that we just read in Amos 7:7 called the word plumb line in English, anak. Now you're going to say, because we so brilliant, well, don't say ankh. It says anak. But when you understand linguistics and how phonetics work, you understand that the phonetics are there. A-N-K, ankh. They're not going to say it exactly like you because they don't belong to your language family. But they're describing the same thing, a plumb line, that which measures righteousness. So when King Hezekiah placed the ankh on his seal, and he also placed the Necher Keppera, he was playing out Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 through 30, which is one of the only things that united us in thought. The idea that we both knew and understood that wisdom was with the Creator, the one God, when he created and formed the universe. And by the way, the Kemetic people, those who are monotheistic, always believed in this particular nature, which is called Kepera. It represented a monotheistic nature. So there's a reason, again, behind why King Hezekiah did this. Hallelujah.